Thank you for your interest in this recording of this webinar. In case you'd already saw the webinar live, I want to let you know that we have replaced the content on slide 34 because we found out after the fact that there was a little bit of a clarification in the language used on slide 34 that needed to be added. So that has been modified from the original webinar you saw. And for those of you just joining us for the first time, you won't notice any difference, hopefully. Thanks. Welcome to today's webinar, To Hold or Not to Hold, Part 2. That is the question. Today, we're going to talk about institutional plans and AACRAO guidance on the use of partial transcript holds based upon how we've interpreted the regulation and the Dear Colleague letter that just came out. So this is a follow-up to the November Part 1 of To Hold or Not to Hold. A little bit different on the housekeeping today because we have a large number of participants in this session. You can't unmute yourself to ask a question. You are limited, unfortunately, at this point in time to using the question and answer or the chat box rather than being able to pull yourself up on camera and or unmute yourself. As usual, we will try to cover the questions at the 45 to 50 minute mark. And then you can also write your questions in there. We'll address those as we go along. As usual, the webinar will be recorded and posted to the AACRAO, doesn't say website there, but it was intended to say AACRAO website. And we will also load the deck as a separate deck to that website with probably the correction that says to the AACRAO website. So with that, today I will be your primary presenter. I'm Wendy Kilgore, the Senior Director of Research at AACRAO. And Jerry is also here with me. He's just off screen at the moment, but he will pop in later on. He's the Dean of Enrollment and Management and Registrar at Wharton County Junior College. He's going to share with you their institutional plans regarding this regulation and how they got there. And that will be after I provide AACRAO's guidance. So it'll be a pairing of what we've suggested that people do, and not everyone can do those things, and what Wharton Junior College is going to be able to do. And after that, we will open it up to Q&A. This webinar and the research that we're writing about related to this data we're sharing here and other data from the most recent survey is made possible in part by Ithaca S&R. And they have helped us with the shaping of the survey design, subject matter expertise. They're helping us interpret the data and also in writing the reports related to this. This is actually going to be the first webinar of 2. This one will cover part of the survey, and the second one later this summer will be released later on, and also there'll be two reports for that reason, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So thank you very much for Ithaca S&R. Appreciate you. So this is just to carry on the theme of Shakespeare throughout this presentation because the topic's quite dry, so I thought I'd try something because I've been working with AI. I don't know if you have as well, but I've worked with ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude AI. And I was just curious as to what it would do. So I prompted it with, hey, look at this guidance that we put together and the name of this webinar and summarize it together using Shakespeare term. I really like what it says. So to hold or not to hold, that is the question. Whether 'tis fairer to the student to free their earned academic record from fiscal change, or to the institution's financial health give heed, and by some middle path serve both, to ponder, to plan. I think it did a really good job. So we're going to start off on that AI prompt there and tell you what the objectives are for today. I got a reaction there. With the share AACRAO's interpretation of the Dear Colleague letter from the Department of Education, which we just received a little bit ago. Share a benchmark of institutional perceptions and process plans related to the regulation based upon the survey we deployed a few weeks ago. Thank you very much for responding to that. Share our new guidance on the use of partial transcript holds, and share the specific plans, as I said earlier, of Wharton County Junior College and how they came to the decision. So Jerry will be doing that, and then some Q&A. Just in case you're not already familiar with these 2 paragraphs that have caused us to take a look at these things starting in November through now, and I think hopefully it's settled down and we have some solid guidance for you. I believe we do. These are the regulatory language within the several hundred-page document of the regulatory changes, of which transcript holds were only a small part. So specifically paragraph 33 and 34. The first one, paragraph 33, talks about whether or not an institution has a belief of misconduct or fraud. in relative to the administration of Title IV funds. So basically, that's telling you you cannot hold a transcript if there's been any misconduct or fraud in the administration of those funds. Paragraph 34 is saying if the student has used Title IV funds to pay for a payment period, which may or may not be the same as a term or a semester, and they have a balance owed, and they have a payment plan in place at the time of the request, that you can't hold that transcript, well, that payment period. So these two, not the first one so much, but paragraph 34 has resulted in a lot of questions. And we submitted those to the Department of Education. We spoke with NACUBO about them. We spoke with COHIO, and a bunch of other people came together and said, and ACE came together and said, how can we put questions together and give them to the Department of Education for further guidance? Because while we were pretty much able to interpret these two paragraphs, there were special conditions underneath all these things, a lot of what if things. So we've submitted those, and we have some questions into your colleague back and some further information. The first thing we want to talk about here today is that the regulation goes into effect July 1st of this year. But the Dear Colleague letter we just received says that it is retroactive. So that means it applies to all students beginning July 1st, even if the balance owed from the payment periods prior to that date. That was one of the primary questions we had from our members. So again, while the regulation and compliance review for that begins in the July 1st, 2024, it's retroactive. We have a raised hand. Belva, would you mind addressing that if you can? Well, I can continue.
Yes, I've already messaged. Thanks,
okay.
Wendy.
Thank you very much. Okay. In addition, the department will enforce the requirements they told us in that Dear Colleague letter through audits and program reviews, and the institutions will have the right to appeal the determinations of noncompliance. So this is a big one. The retroactive is pretty big. So that's basically if somebody has a balance in place, you have to start looking at them retroactively from July 1st. So we have the responses from the institutions who participated in the survey about their perceptions of the regulation and the impacts they think they're going to have on students and the institution. We had two branches to this survey. We're only going to cover the one today, as I suggested earlier. The other branch will be covered in a different webinar. This branch is primarily the institutions without current state regulations limiting the use of transcript holds. We had 326 respondents. One of the good things about that number is well, actually the total number, 524, is representative of a representative sample of the US. So we have a nice solid sample. And most of the data in this presentation will be presented, as I said, in a separate webinar, but some data here will include those from states with regulations already in place, because we wanted to show a compare and contrast of a couple of data points, but didn't want to take the whole time of the webinar to discuss just that data. We really wanted to spend time getting to your guidance and Q&A. As usual, not everyone knew the answer to the question posed in the survey, which is fine because that's not necessarily their expertise. So the sample size for each question is different. So here's an example of a combined slide. We had the no state regulation in pink and the state regulation folks in gold, and their ability to remain confident in their ability to remain compliant with the new federal regulation. As you can see from here, most people are like confident, either very confident or confident in their ability to comply with this regulation come July 1st, which is a really good thing. Those who already have a state regulation in place impacting the use of transcript holds are slightly more confident. Makes sense because most of them are already withholding or not able to withhold transcripts for unpaid balances or similar reasons. So they're used to the practice. We have a few who are not confident or somewhat confident. Hopefully this guidance and their conversations within their own institutions will have them move up to that very confident and confident area. We had a question in the survey that asked about the overall impact on the institution where, again, where no state regulation currently exists. So we're only looking at those folks. They were open-ended responses, and we analyzed those for common themes. And these are their perceived overall impact of the federal regulation, the financial implications, so that many of them anticipate an increase in unpaid balances, bad debt, and a reduction in revenue as a result of the inability to withhold transcripts as leverage for collecting outstanding balances. They also have an increased administrative burden concern about the workload the regulations will impose on their institution, including the need to update policies and procedures and systems to comply with the regulation, and as well as the challenges associated with processing partial transcripts, which we are going to use actually the term partial transcript holds later on and share why. In addition, they believe there might be some enrollment and retention challenges. Concerns might lead to enrollment students' behavior likely to transfer to another institution without resolving their outstanding balances, leading to a loss of enrollment and potential impact on the institution's financial stability. They also anticipate there might be changes in collection practices. Some suggest that they could lead to more aggressive action efforts, such as sending students to collection agencies earlier, which could negatively impact students' credit scores and financial well-being. Some of them are also going to change, many actually are going to either increase or more strictly enforce drop for non-payment practices. So that is a change in the practice that's going to impact learners and students. There's some concerns about confusion and frustration among student, staff, and other institutions. This can due to the complexities associated with partial transcripts or partial transcript holds, the lack of clarity in the regulations language, and potential for misinterpretation of academic records. And by that last part, I mean, if you receive a transcript that either has a partial transcript hold or an institution has suppressed entire sections of the transcript relative to an unpaid balance, it's going to be challenging, or can be, for the receiving institution to understand what's missing, why it's missing, and how it can be addressed. So that's where there's confusion. And also with students who may not understand why they are having a piece of their transcript that looks different from the rest, and how they can address these issues. There are many who express concern about an impact on students' financial responsibilities. They may have a negative impact on their sense of responsibility to pay the debt, less motivated to pay it perhaps, and potentially leading to increased debt and financial challenges in the future. There was a pretty good handful that said, even though they don't have a current state regulation, that there's minimal to no impact. And this we thought could be due to the existing policies that already allow for the release of transcripts in certain circumstances, such for employment purposes or because the institution has a small number of former learners with outstanding balances. So one of our guidances, NACUBO and AACRAO's joint guidance on the use of transcript holds, talked about this. So if you actually had this practice in place already for balances, we talked about not holding transcripts for minimum values, for having payment plan options, for having debt forgiveness plans, and all those kind of things, and or practices in place that says if you're trying to transfer or you're trying to get an employment or licensing thing, that there were special conditions that the transcript could actually be released and should actually be released, even if you had a debt. So maybe these institutions that expect minimal to no impact already had many of those things in place. So we know what we are, but not what we may be. Anticipated increases in key learner and accounts receivable metrics. A lot of data on this slide. I don't intend to spend a ton of time on the data because it will be released in a report, and more time on the guidance. But just bring your attention to this. So this actually is a combined one. The gold is the realized changes in key metrics and increases. And the pink is anticipated increases in the key metrics of states that are going to be impacted by the July 1st regulation, more directly impacted. There's some differences here. So the realized changes you can see in the average dollar value was 28 of increase was 28% in those with states with the ban, but 48% of others are anticipating it, of those without the ban. So there's a little bit of a mismatch here, but we'll see. Only time will tell whether or not those who are going into place in addressing this new regulation will actually end up back where the state regulations have said, that little lower percentage on some of these bars. But they're going to increase efforts to prevent outstanding debts to begin with, which is something AACRAO's talked about. We should probably, as higher education, try to avoid these things to begin with. The impact of the number of learners on the drop for non-payment process will probably be increased with the new regulation, which makes sense. And number of learners seeking official transcripts, some anticipate that change as well. But the percentage of learners being sent to collections, this is the concerning value. So 25% of the states with the ban have already seen an increase in the percentage of learners sent to collections. And 57% of those who are making changes now anticipate that to increase as well. This is one of the things that AACRA has been quite concerned about. And as we said in the other statements already, collections can do quite a bit of harm to a student's financial ability to get an apartment, get a loan, get a car payment, all those kind of things. So collections are one of the tools at hand, but have some negative consequences. We also anticipate that this is the percentage of impact of students that will be differentiated by current learners and former learners and increased access to transcripts. So the majority of institutions for current learners and former learners think that it's like, 5% or less, a change in percentage of students who will have access to an official transcript. That kind of makes sense because we talk about in some of the data we've collected, and I'll talk about a little more later, that the percentage of students with unpaid balances from one term to the next is a pretty small percentage for most institutions. So this kind of makes sense from that standpoint. Strong reasons make strong actions. Institutional preparations and plans to address the regulations. These are the top 6 institutional preparations for change in the federal regulation among institutions who do not have a current state regulation. So there are some, well, a vast majority are going to eliminate the use of transcript holds for an unpaid balance. And it goes down from there. They're going to have to change procedures to comply with new regulations, implement other methods to address unpaid balance, change policy to comply, eliminate the use of transcript holds for any reason. 15% are planning on doing that. And changing technology to support the requirements of the new regulation. A lot of the questions we had asked during the last webinar and in the subsequent COHIO and sorry, drawing a blank, ECSI webinar were questions about how can SISs do this? How can they do partial transcript holds? How can they release partial transcript holds? All those kind of things. And that's some of the questions that we've been trying to address internally and with the vendors. Now we go to plans to use partial transcript holds, and it's combined data. So this is from states with regulations and those without. And I put an asterisk here because, as I mentioned earlier, the term partial transcript has been found to cause concern about the practice. And the term we're using in this the guidance that we will release in whole in a few days is partial transcript hold, which is more accurately descriptive of the practice. And I'll have a couple definitions for you as we go into the guidance. So in our sample of 524 institutions, 1% have already been doing so. 7% have they're going to do a new process. 15% have said they're thinking about it and they don't know yet, but they're going to have to make a decision before July 1st. So what do these numbers mean and compared to the total number of institutions? Because that sample was 524, it is a representative of degree-granting institutions with first-year undergraduates in the United States, as of the numbers we had of 2021 and 2022 number of institutions. With that, we can extrapolate and say, this possibly means that about 35 institutions are already doing partial transcript holds. that another 274 are planning on doing so in response to the federal regulation, and another 529 are considering the option. Again, this is statistics, so that's not necessarily absolutely, but if we believe that this is a representative sample, it's plus or minus 5%. These are some numbers we're talking about. So out of the 3,542 institutions, we have a little under 1,000 that are either considering or will be doing partial transcript holds. And they're going to share their transcripts with lots of folks, which is one of the reasons we're putting some guidance out for this. Some more data, other policy or practice changes in response to the new regulation. We wanted to understand how the institutions felt this regulation was going to affect other areas outside of transcripts. So there's policy changes, practice changes, and no changes here. Just to briefly talk about them. The high end of the scale is 100% on this slide. They believe that accounts receivable is going to have both policy and practice change, about half of the institutions. We've already talked about the student information system and related technology. And institutional reporting, not as much. Admissions, a little bit. And R2T4, also not as much in terms of anticipated changes. Academic advising, on the other hand, and orientation are likely to have changes by about half the population. Some of those changes include talking about addressing unpaid balances or avoiding unpaid balances and what that implications mean to the student right up front and frequently. It's again part of that plan to help eliminate the balance to begin with. We also have the top 10 efforts to prevent an unpaid balance. Part 1, the bar, the little dotted line, is just to show you where the 20% mark is, because there's a limitation in Canva that when you do split data up, it scales the x-axis and it doesn't necessarily scale it the same. So I'm just drawing the 20% line here because the next slide, which is some of the same data, is the other 5 of the top 10, it's a different scale on the x-axis. So this data was institutions were able to tell us whether they're implementing or planning right now to do these specific things, whether it's in place and will remain in place, whether it's in place, but they'll have to change to comply, or they never used it and won't be using it. So we have a mixed bag here that some, as I mentioned in the previous slide, will have it as a topic during orientation. Some will have it during the one-on-one advising meetings, during group advising. There might be text messaging changes, mandatory topic during financial aid meetings. Some are planning on doing that. A lot of things going on in institutions, as you can see, to become compliant and or address the fact that you don't have unpaid balances to begin with. This is a continuation. Again, that x-axis changed, so I wanted to put the 20% bar there. These are less likely to have changes, with the exception of automatically dropping students for non-payment. Some less likely practices are ensuring funding package meets the needs of the learner, providing learners with emergency grants to avoid an unpaid balance. Those things are not as common. As I briefly mentioned earlier, we have related data about why some of these plans are taking place and some of the perceived impacts. There's lots of concerns in the institution. And if your institution hasn't looked at your whole data to determine what percentage of students carry an unpaid balance hold from one term to the next, you may find that it was reflective of not only this data, where we studied 14 institutions' student level data, and found across 2 academic years that the average is only 3.5% of learners, and this was several 100,000 students, had debt that carried from one term to the next. Witchy also repeated this data with another 12 institutions and found about the same percentage, plus or minus 2% or so. They found that the same thing. So we are bringing this up because we want to put a little scale on this. This is a big change in regulation, but hopefully it's only impacting a small number of your students. And especially if you start putting plans in place about preventing unpaid balances to begin with, and may even reduce the percentage that are trying to carry a hold from after they've an unpaid balance after they've left the institution or from one term to the next. That hopefully these balances are resolved to begin with or not incurred to begin with. The better part of valor is discretion, institutional concerns about incomplete transcripts, valid concerns. Thelma, we have Shelley has also raised her hand there, if you don't mind addressing that. Thank you. Concerns about receiving transcripts with missing information, incomplete academic record, quite valid, depending on how that data is suppressed. If it's removed entirely or suppressed in a way that you can see that it's in progress or something like that. There's also admissions decisions. If you don't know what's there or you don't know what's missing or that it's not enough information is included, that how can the institution make an admissions decision that's received that transfer? Related to that is number 3 and number 4, transfer credit evaluation and financial aid and athletic eligibility concerns as well. Increased workload and confusion. We talked about that when we said the original overall implications to the institution. And the number 6 is a pretty big one. Lack of cross-institutional standards and practice. So one of the things AACRAO is well known for is providing guidance on transcripts. We have a whole book on transcript guidance. So this really falls into our wheelhouse, and we have those same concerns as we have about 1,000 institutions who are probably going to do something different than we have done in the past. And we want to try to establish standards of practice because it is a concern. Potential for abuse and misrepresentation. There is that potential. Students potentially hopping from one place to the other, or knowing that data is going to be hidden and using that for getting into other institutions. All kinds of things. There's concern there. It wasn't a whole lot of people who were necessarily concerned about that, but it is there. Let us once lose our oaths to find ourselves, or else we lose ourselves to keep our oaths. AACRAO's interpretation of the regulation and guidance. Back to this definition, and separating partial transcript holds versus partial transcripts. There's been a conflating of those two terms for as we started this early discussion, because it's not something we usually talk about, right? It's just not something we think about, and it became clear that we were conflating the terms here and with people we've been discussing it with, others talking about it. So in this context, partial transcript holds refer to the practice of suppressing certain information from a learner's transcript, such as final grades for a specific term and earned credential, or the entire content of the term, including course subject, course number, course title, and final grades. So that would be a partial transcript hold. Differentiating that from partial transcripts, on the other hand, refer to an institution's practice of allowing a learner to release only a portion of their academic history. For example, a learner who has both graduate and undergraduate academic history at an institution may choose to release only their undergraduate history or only their graduate history. So again, for the purposes here, we are differentiating these two. Partial transcript holds is suppressing certain information within like a term or a couple of terms or an earned credential. Partial transcript hold, you repress holding it back for a reason, versus partial transcripts, which is that separation of, I really only want my graduate record to go to my employer because that's all they're interested in. I don't want them to see that I saw that I'm just going to give you my example, that I got a D the first time I took college algebra and as an undergraduate. I didn't attend class, so that's why I got it. So, you know, there are reasons potentially. And if somebody only really wants to see the graduate level work, only really wants to see the undergraduate level work, institutions are already doing this where they allow a student to pick one or the other if they would choose to do so. In our interpretation, entire transcript holds may not be used for either the Title IV recipients for a payment period with a balance and for which they have a payment plan in place and in good standing at the time of the transcript request. There's a little note at the bottom there because this is slightly different than we talked about in November, because the Dear Colleague letter said that you can hold a transcript until the first installment is made and or if the payment plan is not up to date. So our members asked about that. What if they skip a payment? What if they didn't make their first payment? So the clarification to this is they have to have a payment plan in place at the time of the request, and that payment plan needs to be in good standing. So you cannot use an entire transcript hold under that condition. Or a Title IV recipients with the balance owed by the student that resulted from an error in administration of the Title IV HEA programs or any fraud or misconduct by the institution or its personnel. That hasn't changed. That's still the same. If there's misconduct or fraud or an error in the administration of the Title IV funds, you need to release the transcript. An entire transcript hold may still be used for either a Title IV fund recipient for a payment period with a balance without a payment plan, or with the payment plan but that is not in good standing in place at the time of the transcript request, as long as other payment periods were not paid for by the Title IV HEA funds. Because remember, these are individual payment periods for which this regulation applies. So you have to look at each individually. Or for non-Title IV recipients with a balance, and for other hold reasons not related to a balance, as long as the reason does not conflict with the regulation. So this is, again, a little bit of a nuance, and there is permission to be able to use entire transcript holds, but you need to be careful about how you do that and make sure you're not conflicting with anything and that you're looking at payment periods over time, because it's individual payment periods that this applies to specifically. Now we're entering the section on the guidance on partial transcript holds. We will release a full document that has the entire guidance. This, I'm kind of talking to pieces of it here, but the entire guidance will be released shortly with to the membership, and it will be posted to our website as well. We anticipate that here in the next week or so, that it'll come out and it'll be available to you and your institution. So we interpret that, given that the regulation addresses payment periods rather than the entire transcript, this leaves permission for institutions to use partial transcript holds. AACRAO takes the position that completed and in-progress courses should be visible on the transcript, with the understanding that certain administrative procedures may result in suppression of final grades for the course. For example, courses that are marked incomplete or in progress, or perhaps those with academic renewal or forgiveness. So there are already instances where the course information is there, but there's suppression of the final grade exists, and we understand that. But otherwise, the courses and all related information should be provided on the transcript. If a partial transcript hold is to be used as allowed by the regulation, we believe any practice and policy related to the use of partial transcripts should treat all learners equally. So some institutions, by their own limitations of their systems or practice internally, are not able to do this. But by this, we mean all students, regardless of whether they've received Title IV funds or not. If you're going to use partial transcript holds, apply that to everybody universally, equally, if possible. We strongly support using standardized practices for using partial transcript holds akin to the standardization of transcript practices for other processes, such as the learner earns a grade of incomplete and for courses still in progress. Standardized practice help maintain the integrity of the records, regardless of the issuing institution, and contribute to the trustworthiness of official transcripts among institutions, employers, licensing agencies, and accrediting bodies. So that is why we are supporting a standardized practice if you intend to use partial transcript holds. Before proceeding with using partial transcript holds, review any state regulations regarding the use of transcript holds. Currently, the Department of Education has not provided guidance on how to handle situations where federal regulations conflict with state regulations. If your state has such a regulation, check for any provisions related to using partial transcript holds. The recommendations are aimed at creating a process that is similar to the transcript practice used currently by most institutions for incomplete grades and/or courses in progress. So we are suggesting a process that mirrors something you are already, most of you are already doing. So in this particular case, the partial transcript hold is creating a new grade code that indicates the grade is withheld for an outstanding balance or an administrative reason, whatever you want to say, but a new grade code that's specific to this purpose. Ensure that this grade code does not get included in any grade, credit, term, or cumulative total calculations, just as you would with the others that are similar to this practice. And include all applicable courses on the transcript for the payment period in question. By that, it's the subject, the number, and the title. and the term that it's applied to or the semester it's applied to, so that anybody who's receiving this, another institution, an employer, a licensing agency, will see that there are courses that are actually there and earned by the student, but are being withheld because maybe the grade's incomplete or they're in progress, or in this case, there's an unpaid balance and they do not have a payment plan that's in good standing. So this is the recommendations. This is the meat and potatoes of it. Then you're going to have to create processes for keeping track of this use of this partial transcript holds. You're going to have to update the transcript key and the legend and guide with electronic transcript providers and hard copy providers of your paper if you still use that. You're going to have to update appropriate sections of your institution's academic catalog or handbook or website as needed if you choose to follow this guidance. Whatever you choose to do, though, actually, these things apply. You need to update all these other areas. Communicate clearly and often with learners about the unpaid balances is also part of this. And share changes with policy and practice with your institution's primary transfer partners. So if you intend on using partial transcript holds, keep those folks in mind, please. And Belma, sorry, Ashley has raised her hand as well. If you don't mind addressing that, I very much appreciate it. If you have questions, if you're raising your hands because you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. AACRAO's guidance on transcript annotation. That was another question that got addressed by the Department of Education, or did not actually, but our members have asked about it. Some are planning to use transcript annotation. So neither the regulation nor the Dear Colleague letter provide any guidance in the practice of transcript annotation. So some were planning on annotating and saying the student has an unpaid balance or something to that effect, and parts of the transcript have been suppressed or something along those lines. Some are already planning on doing that, and a couple who have state regulations are already doing that. But absent any guidance from the Department of Education on this topic, it is recommended that an institution seek legal counsel before deciding whether or not to pursue this practice, because there might be a whole bunch of things that we're not aware of that limit or restrict the ability to put a transcript annotation. And finally, before we get to Jerry's story and on to your questions, we also had members ask about whether or not you can withhold an earned credential for an unpaid balance. And rather than trying to interpret this statement, I just put the entirety of the Dear Colleague letter quote in here from the Department of Education. The regulation only requires institutions to provide a student with an official transcript that includes all the credits and that the student earned for periods in which the student received Title IV funds and for which all institutional charges were paid or were included in an agreement to pay. The regulation never require an institution to confer a degree or other credential to a student who has not fully paid the amount they owe to the school, unless the institution has made an error in its administration of Title IV funds, in which case 34 CFR 68.14B33 applies. So some institutions are planning on withholding the degree from the transcript. And if you follow this guidance here and make sure it doesn't conflict with the paragraph 33, then that is permissible under the guidance from the Department of Education. That's what I have. That was a lot of information. The guidance will come out in its full entirety shortly to our members and will be pasted on their website. But I want to have Jerry share his experience here on his plans and how they got there. So I'm actually going to stop the sharing so you can see Jerry a little bit better rather than having this slide deck, this slide here, and then we'll come back to next steps.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for inviting me over to share kind of the thought process here at Wharton County Junior College. My name is Jerry Martinez. I'm the Dean of Enrollment Management and Registrar here at Wharton County Junior College. And our institution is about 5,600 students as of fall 23. And we've been on the same student information system since 2003. And that's relevant here in a minute. But we currently do drop for non-payment immediately when these deadlines pass. We drop students, and we also drop students who are reported as never attending, right? So during those first 2 weeks, we're identifying those students, and we drop those students and we reverse out the charges. So that helps a bit. And since we've been on our student information system since 2003, we're currently migrating into a SaaS environment, which means that we're having to revert back to a lot of the baseline functionality in our ERP, which means we're going to lose a lot of our customizations, a lot of our scripts, and a lot of other things that are not part of their baseline product of our banner system. And because that's important, because if we were to, as we're discussing, what plans and workarounds or what we're going to add to our system, it was important because if we determined we were going to use a customization in our system, then that would obviously not work, since we're moving to the baseline product. So we're really looking at this as to what's going to be the approach that has the least administrative burden. So like Wendy mentioned, the first thing I think that most schools are already doing is they're kind of performing an analysis of all of their holds, right? And we did the same thing. We scrubbed the entire student system, and we found over 71,000 holds out there for students, right? Some of them, students could have multiple holds, but there was a total of 71,000 holds. And from these, over 28,000 were holds that would prevent the issuing of an official transcript, right? So that's quite a bit. And then from those, 10,800 were holds that were financial holds that are directly mentioned in the new reg, right? So we have over 10,800 possible holds, and it's quite a bit. So what we did is we examined just the past 2 years of our Pell recipients, 2002, 2003, who received Pell loans, work study, and we kind of did an analysis. And what we found is we found over 369 students just in the last 2 aid years that had Title IV monies paid and that were enrolled this past fall, right? That's quite a bit of students, right? So, you try to extrapolate that going back all the way, and you can probably get similar percentages. So knowing that we could possibly impact, close to 200 students every academic year, we decided to come up with the following proposal, and this has not been approved yet. This is something that we're working with the subject matter experts in-house, with our registrar staff, with our business office, and this will be vetted by the administration, and then probably teased out by our legal team to make sure that we're doing everything okay. So essentially, the proposal outlines an extract of all the holds, and identifying students that ever received Title IV aid, right? So I mentioned this in our AACRAO communities, so we're casting a very wide net. We're gonna find every student that ever received a Title IV monies and sort of put a code on them, just identify those, and then we're gonna create a new accounts receivable hold, right, to students who have a current hold who are part of this Title IV population, and then we're going to swap out that hold, and we're going to configure that so it won't prevent the printing of an official transcript, because we do have, the automated transcript service through those vendors that, it runs at night, right? And it's kind of just running, and it's running. And so that'll prevent the student's transcript from not being printed, right? And then all the students who are not in the population of the Title IV recipient ever will keep that previous hold that we had and continue restricting the release of their official transcripts. And then once we have that cutoff date, we will work with our business office partners to determine how we're going to give that extra check, working with our financial aid staff right before the business office, bursar's office assigns that hold, whether it's done by batch. How can we kind of tie into the financial aid area to determine whether or not the business office will assign this new hold that we created for anybody who had a Title IV aid assigned or not? And then hopefully that gives us some breathing room so we can re-examine that process in the next 6 months to a year to see how that plays out. Now, some of the considerations that we're finding is, it's a timing issue. You're reviewing the student's transcript request, but at that time they may not have processed they may not have been a Title IV recipient. They may become one in the future, right? Not fully understanding how much extra work is going to be done by our business office staff when they're having to work and check with the financial aid staff to see if they need to apply a new hold. So that we're still ironing out all of that information. But at this time, we are not considering partial transcript release, a partial transcript release. It doesn't, I don't think, and I could be wrong, I don't think there's much value in a receiving institution receiving a partial transcript if they're trying to calculate SAP, right? If they're trying to determine a GPA. Our current ERP users, they're kind of teasing that out. Also, there's some available functionality, but it takes away other things that we weren't anticipating. It just seems that it would cause more questions and have a negative impact on the student than it would help. So we're not considering partial transcript releases. We may consider not posting the degree at the end if there's a balance. I think in my experience over the years, most of the students that get caught up with the transcript hold are typically haven't graduated yet. So perhaps, you know, incorporating that release of the degree notation of the transcript until an outstanding balance is paid, I think schools may see a better result of collecting that money. So that's also something that we're considering once it starts bubbling to the surface that there's groups of students that may be treated differently based on if they receive Title 4.8, and that may be bad for optics may be bad. So we're considering all of those possible solutions. So that's all I had. That's kind of where we're at now. So I'm hoping that, you know, it's going to help some institutions as they're trying to figure this out themselves. But I'll be glad to take up any questions that may be out there.
Thank you, Jerry. You gave a perfect example of all the nuance having to go through, looking at your data, looking retroactively, thinking how the system works. How does this affect other departments? How do we get all our stakeholders involved? And then having to go, okay, we're going to put this in place now, but we may have to revisit this again for other reasons as it starts to roll out. So I very much appreciate you taking your time to share that story with us and be curious to see how it evolves over time and what you end up with, 6-7 months from now. Right. We do have some questions. I'm going to actually share the screen real quick again. Hopefully a portion of the screen. Sorry, I have to talk myself through this. There we go. And we will go to the one last slide and then open it up for Q&A. So the next steps, we're going to post the AACRAO guidance on the website and release to the membership. It'll be posted fairly soon. But I've seen a couple questions pop up, whether this slide deck will be made available. Yes, I have to fix that one where it doesn't say AACRAO website on the housekeeping page. I'll create that PDF and get it off to Belma, who's helping us today, and I'll get that off to her within an hour, and she'll post it when she has some time. I would anticipate that in the next couple of days. We are going to be releasing the reports on institutional plans and perceptions. The first one will be coming out June 26th, maybe sooner if we can get the data analyzed and written. That is the report of institutional plans currently. So much like what Jerry's talking about, we're going to have a bunch of open-ended responses and fixed data from the survey that you all participated in. That'll be June 26th. The second report will be what was the impact already felt on institutions with state bans and their perceptions of that state ban and the federal regulation. That'll be in later this summer. Most importantly, maybe not most importantly, but equally importantly, the Department of Education has agreed to do a Q&A webinar with us on June 5th. That website webinar, Belma, correct me if I'm wrong, please. That registration is already available on the AACRAO website, the webinar page. Again, I believe it is, but Belma will pop in here if it isn't. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, turn off the stop and share, and go to the Q&A and see what questions we have. Just give me a second to get things cleared out. So the Q&A, we have 17 questions. Let's see what we can do here. If we don't have the answers, others on the webinar mate, or we have Bill Gill, who is also our government relations person, who might be able to answer them. So let's see. We are an institution that will move forward with releasing partial transcripts. Partial transcript holds, hopefully. Do we have the authority to decide what information we want to withhold, redact, and omit? There we go. Withhold grades, GPA, the term, but release the course code and title. Or should we withhold all the information for the term? I've not seen guidance on this. So I think maybe that actually I can see the time on that. That was at 11:15 a.m. We provided the guidance later on. AACRAO's guidance is to do as to show the course subjects, title, information, and course number and the term, but change the grade. That is our guidance. So hopefully that addresses that answer. That question there. Do you have any additional guidance on whether we can use transcript hold to initiate a conversation with the student about their balance? As long as we still release the transcript whether the student resolves the balance or not. You are additional guidance on whether we can use the transcript hold to initiate a conversation with the student about their balance, as long as we still release the transcript. Oh, as a prompt? There isn't any direction from the department in their dear colleague letter or not, but to me, and Jerry, please chime in here, it sounds like you'd be compliant because you're releasing the transcript, but you're using some hold mechanism that gets the student to come and talk to you and gets them to come talk to you about the balance. Is how I'm interpreting this question. That seems perfectly logical and sound to me. Jerry, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that may be a good idea, inserting somewhere that they've acknowledged something, that there's an outstanding hold. If we can collect that data, I think that would only help. But I'm just thinking of a student who just doesn't follow through, right? You're essentially creating a de facto hold still. So while I think it's a good idea to somehow incorporate that acknowledgement from the student, I'd probably just be careful.
That's true. And you made a point that there could be an automated way to do that, right? There could be a trigger. I didn't even think about that. A trigger that says, hey, we're going to release your hold, but you're acknowledging that you have an unpaid debt. But remember, they're supposed to have a payment plan in place as well. So you don't have to release the transcript for a Title IV recipient with an unpaid balance for a payment period if they do not have a payment plan in place at the time of the transcript request, or that payment plan is not in good standing. As long as the institution has not committed an error, misconduct, or fraud. So you still can hold it if they have a balance, if they don't have that payment plan, et cetera, et cetera. But as a conversation point, saying you have a balance, triggering that and having them acknowledge it, I don't see any problem with that. Does this apply to schools holding registration for future semesters if there's a balance? Those are two different things. As long as there was not misconduct or fraud, you can use registration holds. And institutions are still planning on doing that. Our report will talk to you about a bit about that data point. But yeah, because you're not stopping the transcript, you're doing something else. You're trying to get them to come see you. And Jerry, I can't remember if you said you're going to be using registration holds.
No, we wouldn't be using a registration hold for that.
Okay. So we have an example here. A student has used financial aid every semester they've attended at our institution. They have a balance from one of the semesters. They do not have a payment plan in place, or they're not in good standing for the payment plan. Can we institute an entire transcript hold, or can we only withhold the semester with the associated with the balance? This is like stump Wendy and maybe Jerry. All these little nuances, right? I want to make sure I read this. They have had used financial aid for every semester they've attended. They have a balance in only one of the semesters, and they do not have a payment plan in place, or they're not in good standing with that plan. Can we institute an entire transcript hold, or can we only withhold the semester which is associated with the balance? You can only withhold the semester that's associated with the balance.
That's
on
right.
that particular one.
That's how I'm reading that. And that extreme example is one that I'm using often as I'm trying to explain it to students. And only trying to frame it in a way that administratively, how could you make your ERPs consider that kind of different terms where there's a balance and one that was paid, and maybe another one that was paid, and then another one that wasn't paid, right? So I use those kind of extreme examples, but I think you're right.
This one I think is going to have to wait till June 5th. If a student debt is held in a collection agency, does that count as a plan? What if they are not on a payment plan with that agency? That is a question that is outside of my wheelhouse, and probably Jerry's as well. So I would ask you, anonymous attendee, to attend the June 5th webinar with the Department of Education and ask that question there. They might be able to answer it. Let's see, we're getting a bunch of questions. They're popping in reverse here. Let me see. Sorry, it just moved. What would a transcript look like under the recommendation to show the course, the balance remains unpaid? I think we could make more sense to exclude all the details. Okay, I think we addressed that because we started with the guidance. So you're asking what would the transcript look like if you're going to withhold it? We recommend, again, listing the subject, the course number, the term information, and the course title, just as you would for an incomplete or in progress course. So if you're going to withhold a partial transcript, the rest of it should be there. We strongly recommend that you do that so that any receiving party understands that those courses are there and why the final grade is not being included. Students study the development, assessment. Hi, Bill. The study the development, assessment, and enhancement of oral and written languages. Emphasis is placed on emerging literacy from. That's not a question. I don't think. Maybe it's a comment. Wouldn't the impact of clearinghouse reporting if you didn't withhold conferring a degree when a student has been completed? Jerry, do you have an answer for that? Because I don't.
Yeah, no, I think the posting of the degree would probably, I'm thinking theoretically will still happen. Your ERP would be updated. Whatever solution we come up with have to be some type of a mod, right? Because you do need to report the separation from the institution, whether they stopped enrolling or they graduated in your G status report. So yeah, if it's not done right, then yes, you could impact that reporting of the graduated status. However, the separation may still be picked up if they're not in your following semester, because then it'll revert back. Clearinghouse will then still report the separation the second day after the last day, the next day after the end of the last term the student attended. So, but it wouldn't be completely accurate why they separated.
Very good point. So there's and that's interesting because the Department of Ed used the term conferring, which for registrars is a very specific process. It's the posting of the degree to the record. And to Jerry's point, and actually Doug McKenna also responded too, there's a difference between conferring and posting it to the transcript, that you can actually suppress it on the transcript, like run a function, a customized function that doesn't leave it there, but it's actually conferred within the system, and that's the data that drives the clearinghouse reports. So thank you. Who has access to see the indicator that you're creating that exposes students on financial aid? I'm not, if you want to, the person who typed that, clarify that a little bit. I'm not sure what the question is because it exposes student on financial aid. I'm not understanding the question. Sorry about that. We have 3 more minutes and we have several more questions, and we won't be able to get through all of them, but what we will do is keep this transcript, and Bill, Gil, and I will look at these, and if we have to run into by Jerry, we will as well, if they're related to his practices specifically. Can we ask students to start a payment plan to get their entire transcript if they've submitted the transcript request, or is that too late to be in compliance? It's fine, because that's the nuance, because the language says if it's in place at the time of the transcript request. There's nothing that says that you can't, hey, enter a payment plan now and I'll give you your transcript. I think that's the intent of the regulation, that as long as there's a payment plan there, you're supposed to release it. And whether or not it happened before they asked for the transcript or simultaneously or shortly thereafter, I don't think it matters.
Let me just jump in, Wendy, but
Yep.
institutions do have the flexibility to withhold the transcript until the first payment is made.
That's true.
And so institutions do have the discrepancy, and then also if a payment plan is missed, then they also have to come back and re-enter a payment plan or continue with their payment plan. It's complicated, but those are nuances.
That's true. And I think we've covered that in our guidance that you and I talked about this morning, and we shared here. So a couple more before we run out of time. Is there a time frame for when the transcript request needs to be fulfilled to remain in compliance? The regulation and the Dear Colleague letter they do not address that at all. So they're silent on it. Okay. Somebody's making a comment here more than a question. If a student had a payment plan in place for a particular semester but did not complete their payment obligations but also received Title IV funds, can we have their transcript held for that semester? Yes, we talked about that. So they're not up to date on their payment plan, then you can withhold it, even if they've received Title IV, as long as misconduct or fraud is not, or mismanagement is not involved. Is there a likelihood of the date being pushed beyond 7/1? Bill, would you like to address that in the last minute we have here? And then we'll answer the rest of the questions as a supplemental document.
That's TBD. That's
Okay.
absolutely TBD. As a community, we've requested for an extension for the July 1, but my understanding is, and especially based on the guidance and FAQs from the department, I believe all institutions should be ready to go with this starting July 1.
Agreed. Well, thank you, everyone. I very appreciate you joining us today. I very much encourage you to enjoy and participate in the June 5th webinar for the Department of Education conversation. And Jerry, I want to thank you very much again for joining us here today, and Bill as well. And we'll keep rolling this out. If any of this guidance changes, we will update it and inform the membership, and we will get to the questions that haven't been answered. So thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.